Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to set up the dialogue system in this episode, but before we do that, I want to make sure that an interaction does not occur until we get to the end of the path, right? So if I click on the signpost from here, my guy walks over to the signpost, and then when he gets there, he should interact with it. But actually what's happening is he's interacting with it before he gets there, because all we're doing is calling the interact method on interaction, which at this point means right when I click. Notice interacting with the item. So what I want to do is I want to set up the check to see when we get to the end of the path, and when we do, then start the interaction. So to do that, I'm going to handle this in our interactable, and I'm going to set up, it's going to be within update, we're going to be checking every frame. There's not really any built-in way to, like a callback of any kind, that you can call whenever you get to the end of the path, whenever you get to destination, in the nav mesh that comes with Unity. So we're going to set up our own little check here. And the first thing I want to check is I want to check to see if we have a player agent, right? Make sure that's not null. So I'm going to do player agent is not equal to null. And the next thing I want to check is I want to make sure that there's a path that is found and that we're not still looking for a path. So I'm going to do an and player agent dot path pending, right? So I want to make sure that's not happening. Make sure our path is not pending. And once I have that, I want to check the distance between my player and the destination, as well as compare that to how far away the stopping distance is, right? So if I am within 2 units and my stopping distance is 3 units, then yeah, I'm there, I can stop, that's fine. We can't obviously say, you know, hey, I want to see if the player is at the destination exactly, because that's not going to happen if we're working with floating point numbers. We're going to have large differences when it comes to that. Well, very fine differences, but they're going to be very far off when we're talking about the floating point. So I want to first check to see what the player agent, and I'll get remaining distance. So remaining distance, that's the distance between the player agent and the destination. And I want to see if it's less than the player agent dot stopping distance. And we're checking it like that because we are changing the stopping distance based on what we're doing. So if we're moving to interaction and we're just using the base interaction method, the base moved interaction method, it's going to be 3. But in our world interaction, we set it to 0 if we're just moving the player to somewhere on the ground. So with that, inside of this, that's what I want to call interact, which will call this method, or if it's overridden, it will call the method that overrides it from a derived class. So get rid of that, and that should give us a starting point. Go back into Unity. Just go ahead and restart the game here. All right, I want to click on the signpost. And when I get there, okay, so I get there and interacts. It doesn't interact until I get there, which is what I want, but it interacts on every single frame because it doesn't know to do it once, right? So what I want to do is I want to set up a flag. I'm just going to create a private, which I know is assumed, but I want to make sure I define it as private. Private, make a boolean, and I want it to be has interacted. Interacted, yes. And on move to interaction, whenever the interaction is initiated, I want to make sure I set it to false, right? It's a new interaction. Our player definitely has not done it before we even started doing anything. So has interacted is going to be false. And then once we interact, I want to set it to be, let's see, has interacted is true. Right, but I also want to check to make sure that it is not true, because if it is true, that means we've already interacted with this interaction. We've already done this interaction. So don't do it again until this flag is reset, which means a new interaction has occurred. So I want to say not has interacted. Oh, let me space. Not has interacted. as well as an and. Player agent is not null, and we do have a path. And that should give us pretty much what we're looking for. Click on the post. I get there, interact one time, and that's that. Cool. That is what we want. So that'll work for now. We may have to tweak a few things later on, but for now, that's what we want. And let's go ahead and set up the dialog system. We're going to start off with the dialog menu in game here. So on my canvas, I'm going to create a panel. And I'm going to call this panel dialog. Just like that. And going to grab my Rex tool. I'm just going to scale this down. I'm just going to guess at what I want it to be for now. Put it like that right there. And we're going to leave the default colors and everything for now. And inside of this, we're going to have a button for the continue. So I want to be able to click on the button and it'll show the next line of text or whatever. So I'm just going to call this continue. And inside of that, I want to access the text. And I'm just going to say it says continue. Just like that. Grab the button and we're going to bring it down just there for now. And I'm going to align it to the bottom in the center. And that's fine. I want to make sure this doesn't stretch. I don't want to mess with that right now. I'm just going to align it to the bottom in the center as well. And that should be fine. So now within Dialog, I want to create a text field here. And this is where the dialog will be. And we're going to scale this out. Just like this. Looks good. And go ahead and center it. And I'm going to center it horizontally and vertically. And I want to, let's just make it bold. Nah, it's fine. We'll keep it normal. I want to increase the font size a bit. Actually, let's do best fit. And check best fit. And min size, I want to be like 14. Max size, 40 is too much. Let's make it 20, 26 or something. And the color, honestly, I don't care about this right now. We'll just make it something like that. And that seems fine. And dialog, I'm going to keep the name of text for that object because it is just the text inside of the dialog box. And then I also want to make another, we can make another panel. So I'm going to go to UI, going to go down to panel. And this is going to be the name of the NPC that's talking to us. So we have to add that property onto our NPC as well so we can update that per NPC. I'm going to call this name. Yeah, name, that's fine. I'm just going to scale this. I'm just guessing at all this right now. And let's just move it up a little bit, just like that. That looks fine. So that we can actually see it. And inside of that, I'm going to create another text element, and it's going to be called text. That's fine. Name text, and this is going to say name for now. And obviously, we'll probably come back into this and make it look like something because that's ugly. But for the purpose of this, it'll be fine. And there we go. And that's the UI for the dialog system. Now I want to create an empty object. This is going to be the game object that handles the dialogue. So I'm going to call it dialog system. And this is going to be a singleton object, which means I only want to create one if one doesn't exist. If one already exists, I don't want to make one. And we're going to have a static reference to this single object so that we can reference it from other objects without having to have a direct reference, some type of reference to the object specifically, because we can be sure that the one instance that we find of this through the static reference is the only instance that exists because we set up the singleton pattern to work for that. So I will show you that in just a second. but I want to create a C# script called Dialog System or Manager or something like that. But system's fine for this. So I'm going to drag that and drop it onto the dialog system. And I'm going to open this in Visual Studio. And the first thing I want to do is I want to set up the singleton so that it works with the static reference. So we're going to set up a property. I'm going to type in prop, and I am in Visual Studio, and I'm going to tab over, and it's going to set up my property for me. It's an automatic with a getter and a setter, so that I don't have to define a getter or a setter. It's going to create the private property for us, and all we have to do is fill in this information here. It's going to be a public static, and now this is where it gets cool. It's going to be a dialog system, which is what this class is, right? That's going to allow us to create the static instance of this object. And I want to call it instance. Just kind of makes sense, so we'll keep it at instance. Now in start, actually we'll use await for this, because we want it to be like the first thing, right? And what we have to do is we have to check to see, first of all, does instance exist? Is it null? If it does exist, is it equal to this object? Is it equal to dialog system that we have created here? If it is not, then we need to make sure that we reset it to be that. So the way I can handle that is I can say if, and then I'll say instance is not equal to null, right? And instance is not equal to this. If those conditions are met, that means that an instance exists that is not this instance. So I'll just go ahead and destroy. Once you start relying on IntelliSense to aid you in your typing, not necessarily tell you what you can type, but aid you in your typing, right? I type DES, I expect it to fill and destroy for me, so I continue on to the next thing. And it, more often than not, it seems, with the solution being a Unity project, I get these issues where it just stops working, right? So if I were to save that and restart Visual Studio, everything's fine, but that gets so frustrating, especially making a video. But I won't continue for now before I restart, and I'm going to do else. So if those conditions are not met, that means an instance does not exist. We need to set it to be equal to this, which is a reference to this instance of the object, the one that we have created by dragging and dropping the component on a game object in our hierarchy, right? So that's exactly what we want. So now it exists, and we can reference it with instance. Pretty cool. So now let's think about how we're going to set up the dialog system. First of all, I want a way to add new dialogue to the dialog system, and then I want a way to continue the dialogue. Say we have a conversation open, right? I want a way to be able to click the continue button, and it will take me to the next bit of dialogue from that NPC. And once we are done with the dialogue, once we have read all there is to read, I want to close the dialog window, and that way I can continue on with whatever I was doing. So the first things first, let's do the add new dialogue, right? I want to call it add new dialogue. It's going to be a public, so we can access it from our NPCs. Void, I don't want to return anything, and it's going to be add new dialogue. And this is going to take, we'll take an array of strings, and I will call it just lines. That's fine. And this is going to, we're going to assign the value of lines to, we'll make it a list in dialog system. So if I were to come up here and define a public list, first of all, we need to use the generic namespace. I'm going to use system.collections, and I want to access the generic types, which is what a list is, generic list. And we're going to pass it a type of whatever we assign the lines to be, which in this case is string. So I'm going to do list of string. I'm going to call it dialog lines is equal to a new list of string, just like that. So now we have the list that we can populate with the lines that we passed over from Add New Dialog. But what if we already have lines in this from the previous dialog? Well, let's see. We can either add or set. Here's what I'll do. I'll take dialog lines and I'll just make it into an empty list by just recreating it using the constructor just like that. So it is now an empty list with no elements in it whatsoever, and that gives us the opportunity to add the array of items. And the way I'm going to handle this is I'm going to do a for each. Just like that. And I'm going to say string, and we're going to call it line in lines, right? So lines is the array that we're passing add new dialog, as you can see here. And line is what I'm calling the element that we're grabbing from that element in the string, and it is of string type. Basic C# stuff, I'm not supposed to be explaining this anyway. This is not for very beginners, so I'm going to stop doing that. Probably not. And I'm going to then add it to the dialog lines list. So grab dialog lines, do add, and I'm going to say line. Just like that. Pretty cool. And just to make sure it's working, I want to go into log it out. I'm going to log out the amount of lines that we have in dialog lines. So count for a list. And that should do that for us. And now what we have to do is, to make this work, right, to be able to send over this text, I want to go to NPC, first of all, and what I need to do in NPC is I need to create a way to add dialogue to the NPC, or in this case, monologue, because it's pretty much just the NPC talking to us. So what I want to do is we're going to use just an array of strings of text, and we can add these strings of text in the interface. But it's not necessarily the best way to do it. It's just in line with keeping this very simple. What I would do personally is I would create individual files for dialogue. In this case, NPC files, it would be a JSON file, and I would structure it per NPC, and I would have branches of dialogue in the JSON file that I can skip through and interact with based on what NPC I'm with, what NPC I'm talking to, what part of the tree I'm in, and so on. But in this case, keeping it simple, make a public array of strings, and I will call it dialog, and that's all I need because we're going to be assigning it in the inspector. And on interaction, I need to call the dialog system. Keep forgetting IntelliSense is not working at the moment. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick because I'm going to want that. I'm going to save and restart. All right, and we're back and it is working now. So go through the dialog system, which in this case is going to allow us to access the instance, which is what we want. So I'm going to go through instance, and inside of instance, I want to access, it was add new dialog. And notice how that worked, right? We don't have a static class. We don't have a static object. But we do have a static reference to the object that that component is attached to. And that allows us to access it through the instance. Now, I couldn't access it through just the class here. That wouldn't work. We have to go through the object that we created that refers to the instance of that class. Pretty cool. So now all this wants is a array of strings. So I'm going to pass it dialog. And that's pretty much all I want to do. I also want to create a name, though. So let's create, and we're not going to work with this just yet, but I want to go ahead and create the name. I'll just call it name. And we can pass this through once we set up the system a bit more. But I want to now go into the hierarchy and grab the NPC and look at it. And what I'll have is, first of all, I need to hide this. I'm going to hide this. I don't know why it yelled. I'm sorry. I'm going to hide. It was an interactable here. Yeah. We're going to hide this in the inspector. So I'm going to tag it with hide in inspector. And that way it's not going to render that in the inspector for us because we don't need that in the inspector. It is handled in the script privately, but I'm using it as a public member because it has to be passed around from object to object. So just like that, I want to grab dialog, and I'm going to say this bit of dialog is going to have 3 elements, and I'm going to say there's a cave up there. Many have spoken of the horrors. Adventurers go in, but adventurers. I'm not a historian, but adventurers do not come back. And you'll probably not listen to my warning. Anyhow, wow, this is a great conversation. And the name of this guy is Mr. Spankles. Okay. So creative. And that would then take us back to Dialog System. And what I want to do now is, well, first of all, let's just grab that name, right? I'm going to grab string name, NPC name. And I want to set up the name. Let's create. We don't have anything. Yeah, let's just go ahead and create NPC name. And also NPC name to be equal to, oh goodness, yeah. This dot NPC name is equal to NPC name. Okay, that should work for us just fine. This being this instance of dialog system, NPC name being the parameter that we passed in. I'm going to explain the same thing over and over, I feel, because I think I've already explained that. So with that set up now, what I want to do is I want to grab all of the UI elements from our UI. What we just created, we have the continue, the text, the name, all that stuff. So I want to set up and grab a reference. I'm going to make a public, and it's going to be just a game object. And I'm going to say dialog panel. And we're going to use this to reference the dialog panel, which we can then use to grab the children of the dialog panel, which will give us continue, text, and name. So I'm going to go to dialog system, first drag it at the top here. Drag it up to the top. And on dialog system, we have dialog lines, which we don't actually want. You can hide that, but I'm not going to worry about it. And public, oh, we have an error, which is why we're not. Oh, of course we do. Because in NPC, we're just passing dialog, need to also pass name. So now this should allow the thing to compile and give us our new field in the inspector. Yep, so again, we'll probably hide these in the inspector, but not going to worry about it right now. I'm going to drag dialog onto the dialog panel. And that gives our Dialog Manager access to the dialog UI panel. Cool stuff. Now what I want to do is I want to go into Awake. And you could do this individually if you wanted to set up each link to each UI element in the inspector. You can do that, but I'm going to handle it all in code. So first of all, what I need is I need access to the UI namespace because we're going to be using the button and the text and the panels and whatnot. So I want to go through Unity Engine and grab the user interface namespace. And now I'm going to set up a couple of members for us. The first variable I want is going to be a button, which again, if you don't have, use the Unity Engine.UI namespace. I'm going to call it continue button. And then I'm going to set up text. And I'm going to have dialog text and name text. The comma allows us to define multiple variables of the same type, just keeping it all in one line. Nice. And then the other thing that I would need we're going to need to know what index we are on in the dialog lines list, right? So if we're on the 3rd line or the 5th line or whatever, we have to know where we're at so that we can render the correct text to the UI. So what I want to do is I want to set up just an integer. I'm going to call it dialog index. All right, sounds good, sounds good. And then we're going to use all this in the awake to grab references to the UI elements. So continue button needs to grab the button. So I want to set that equal to the dialog panel, which is the game object that we had the reference to in the inspector. Go through the dialog panel and note that the dialog panel has the children of the continue button, the text, and the name panel. So what I want to do is I want to go through the get component method of that game object, and I'm looking for, it's a button. Wait, what am I doing? I need to get the child first, right? So I want to go through the transform component of the dialog panel object, and that allows me to use getChild and findChild. GetChild is looking for the child by the index, by the ID, and the findChild is looking for it by the string name. So we're going to use that because we don't necessarily know what order they're going to be in. We might move them around, but we know the name's going to be whatever we set it to be. So the continue button name is continue. And since we have that game object now, we also just have to grab that button component because we're looking for a button type. So I'm going to do get component. It is of type button, just like that. And now we have the continue button. Cool, so what I can do then is take the continue button and we're going to add a listener to the onClick event. So in the new Unity UI stuff, I know we've not used this a lot, but we have a bit in the inventory system. There's a whole new event system, right? And this allows me to add listeners inside of the inspector for the onClick, right? For the button going to the onClick panel there, and I can add what happens when it happens. Or I can do it in code, which I like to do. It's my favorite thing to do. I can add event listeners to the onClick event by saying continue button dot onClick. That is the, as you can see, it is the event for the button clicked event. As far as when the button is pressed. Cool. So on click then I can say add listener. And now this is going to be where we type in what happens when on click happens. But it has to be a delegate. And that means we're going to define it just like this. And I don't know actually if we've talked about events and delegates just yet. If not, I'll definitely make a video on those because they're quite important. So as a delegate, it's going to be, what's the name of that? When we click on it, let's go ahead and set one up, make it a public void, continue dialog. Just like that, right? So now on click, I want to continue dialog. And you would just put in the method just like you would call it from anywhere else in your code. And don't forget the semicolon to end the statement there. But that's what we want right there. So now the button is wired up. I also want to grab the text. So it's going to be dialog text is the dialog panel once again, the transform once again. I'm going to find the child by the name of text, which actually we could probably just get the component directly. It's fine. We'll just get component. You could do like a get child component or whatever it's called, but we'll just handle it this way just because that's how we handled the last one. Text, and there we have it. And then also want dialog, or sorry, not that. Name text is equal to dialog panel dot transform. Okay, so this one though, we're looking for the text within the child panel, right? So name is a panel. Inside of that we have the text. So I want to grab the text that's inside of the name panel. And to do that, I will first of all do the same thing. Find child. And it is called name. But then I want to get the child of the child that we found by name. So I can do get child, and we know it's the one and only child in that object, right? So I can just pass it the ID of 0, which is going to be the first child in that object, but it's the only child, so it's a safe bet that it will be 0 at all times. So we can do that. And then all I need to do is get the component of text. Okay, so like I said, you could do this all in the inspector if you wanted to, but I didn't want to, so I did not. And that's that. And now I also know that on awake, there's no reason for the dialog menu to show, because there's not going to be dialogue unless we want to activate dialogue, unless we want to start a new dialogue. So I want to make sure that at start, dialog panel is just turned off. And there's dogs barking. Great. So I'm going to do set active to false. It's going to set the active state of dialog panel, the game object, to false. If you want to turn it back on, you just do it to true, right? It's on off. So set active false. And that's pretty good, pretty good. And I know that I am going to want to set the dialog index to be 0 whenever we add new dialogue. I assume that'll be the case. At least we'll see when we get there. And now all we need to do is handle the sending of all this information that we just got here from our NPC to the UI. Right, and we have references to the UI now, so it should be no problem. What I'll do is I'll just set up another method here that's going to be, let's make it create dialog. This is going to handle enabling the dialog panel as well as assigning the text values to the elements inside of that panel. So the first thing I want to do is I want to grab the dialog, the dialog text, and grab the text property of that, which is just the string of text that it uses to render text on the screen, right? So the text is just going to be a string, and the string that I want is going to be dialog lines, and then just the first index within dialog lines, right? Because we're creating a dialog, we know that we want to show the first bit of text within dialog. But just in case you go back to this and you've not reset the index for some reason unique to your game or whatever, then we can make sure it just says dialog index right here. Dialog index. There we go. And then I want to also set the dialog name text, is that what I called it? Yeah, I shouldn't have called it that. And set the text property of that to be equal to the NPC name. And then all I have to do now is re-enable the dialog panel. So set active to true. And there we go. So it's going to assign the appropriate line of text to the dialog, assign the appropriate name, and then once it's done, it's going to turn it on. That way we can see what we assigned. And that should be fine. Now within continue dialog, all this is going to handle is pretty much increasing the dialog index and then showing the new dialogue based on that. So what I want to do first of all is I want to check to see, is this index of dialogue, is it first of all in the array, right? Are we out of range already? Are we at the last one? If we're at the last one, then we don't need to show anything else. We just need to close it once continue is clicked. So let's check and see. I'm going to grab the dialog index. I want to see if it is, well, we can handle it. We can just do like a less than dialog lines dot count. And okay, so it's going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If there's one element in the list, it'll be 1. But we know if there's one element in the list and it's at the first space in the list, the first spot in the list, it's going to be index 0, as 0 is the base index in C#. So what I want to do is I'll just subtract 1. That way we know that we're comparing the index to the actual index of the amount of items that we have. So the only way I'm going to handle this is just like this. It would be fine. And then I'll just increase the dialog index by 1. So just do the double plus sign. We're just going to add 1 to the current value of that property. And then set the dialog text to be the new dialog index line. Just like that. Cool. But what if it's time to close the panel? What if we've seen all the text there is to see? All I'm going to do now, since we're checking for that, just like that, we're going to do an else and say if it is the last one, then just grab the dialog panel and set it to false again. No need to handle resetting all the text and stuff, because we're going to handle that each time a new one's created. And that's a lot that we've just done without testing, so let's see what happens. I'm going to click play. Okay, and first of all, the panel went away. That's good, that's what it's supposed to do. And if I interact with this NPC, it doesn't come on. Did I not tell it to come on? Oh, I'm not calling this at all. So I'm going to do create dialog after we have added a new dialog. Going to do create dialog. Okay, everything's still fine. I'm going to click the NPC. And there we go. Interact with an NPC. There's a cave up there. Many have spoken of the horrors. Adventurers go in, adventurers do not come back. You probably not listen to my warning anyhow. And then you click continue and it goes away. Wow, it actually works. Cool. And we go to the cave against his warning. All right. That's kind of the whole... Anyway. That's cool. Oh, did it change the name? I didn't even look. Yeah, Mr. Spankles. All right, now what if I have 2 NPCs though? Let's test it with 2 NPCs. I'm going to duplicate that NPC. And this NPC, we're going to say howdy. I have a stomach ache. And that's all we're going to say. We're just going to make it 2 elements. It's going to be called coffee. Okay. Let's move him. It's going to move him right back here, right there. And I'm going to click on this NPC. Yep. And then we'll click on this NPC. Howdy. Coffee. I have a stomachache. Oh, poor guy. And this item does item things. Cool. So that is the dialog system, right? We're still going to work on it. You can mess around with how it looks, how it functions, all you want. But for me, that's going to be it for the dialog functionality, at least in this series. We might cover a more advanced system in its own little one-off series, and it'd be kind of cool, one-off episode. Actually, the sign would throw a dialog up too, and we can do that the same way we handle the NPC, right? Just to show you real quick. I know I said that was it, but I think it'd be pretty cool to have this do something too. So what I want to do is on interaction, let's not get rid of the log there. On interaction with the Dialog Manager, and just showing you how the singleton pattern is really helping the modularness of this whole system. So I'm going through the dialog system, going to grab the instance, going to add new dialog, and we don't have to make the string for it right now in the inspector. I'm just going to test it and say, hey, I'm a son. And it needs a name, so I'm going to say the name is son. Actually, I can't do that. So we'll have to create an overload for add new dialog. You know, just for simplicity, we could make an overload. Or it might be a better idea, actually, if our sign does have an array of things it can say, right? It can still just say one thing. We can still just keep the array at one length. But having the ability for it to be multiple lines of text, that's not a bad thing, right? So we'll just pass it off like that. And that'll save us some work too. Not a bad idea. So I want to grab the signpost, and you would have this assign system a bit better than this, a bit better than I have it at least, because now I have to go in through all these environment objects here, find the thing that has the signpost attached to it, which for some reason is that, and go into the dialog and set the dialog. But you wouldn't do it that way. You would have these as a prefab, the whole thing is a prefab, and you would have it probably on this, right? And you would have it where you can just select that and go in and change the dialog on that. And you'd probably have everything organized a bit better so you can get to it a bit easier. But not me. Not me. So if I play this now and click on the signpost, I get at the signpost and it says, this is a cave. From the sign, click continue. Everything works fine. Everything works as you expect. And now that is going to be the end of this video. In the next episode, we're going to set up the character stats as well as start on the enemy combat. That's going to be fun. Hope you guys stick around for that. And after that, we have inventory. And then who knows what else. But that's as far as I've got so far. Stick around for that, guys. If you have any questions, leave a comment below this video, and I'll be happy to get back to you. I am more than ecstatic to be back doing this stuff for you and for me, really, because I really enjoy doing it. So don't be afraid to ask me any questions. I am here now. I know I've been away for a while, but I'm here now, and I really want to talk to you, help you out, and just let me know what you think. All right? My name is Austin, and I will see you next time.